Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through the business news stories you need to know about from the continent and beyond. But first, a quick run through the market. So September is proving to be quite the red month for a lot of the bourses we do track. It's not just today that's full of red ink. The top 40 in South Africa, the EGX 30 up north, the Nasdaq, they've all fallen by between 5.9 and 4.6% respectively. Now, Nigeria's main index has a decline of a smaller magnitude, just under 1%. The Nasdaq, however, was 2.7% lower at 1721 GMT, setting it up effectively for its biggest one-day drop since May, according to Bloomberg data. Further afield, Hong Kong central banks has asked banks there to report their exposure to the debt-laden China Evergrande Group as the markets are bracing themselves for the potential fallout from the highly indebted real estate firm. Here's what's coming up tonight. The troubled South African and Kenyan airlines pen a deal in the first steps to create a Pan-African airline group. East African banks are urged to adopt new strategies to cope with growing client demands. And retail petrol prices in the UK are at an 8-year high amid a fuel supply crisis. Our starting point tonight is aviation. Kenya Airways has partnered with South African Airways. Remember, these used to be among the top 2 largest airlines on the continent not too long ago. They've come together to try and improve their services and to keep themselves afloat. The loss-making airlines have signed a memorandum of cooperation on the 28th of September as they seek to form, in the long run, a Pan-African airline. Now, the agreement, however, does not preclude either of them from pursuing commercial cooperation with other carriers within their route network strategy. This also comes a fortnight after African Airlines agreed to pursue a consolidation model at a workshop hosted by the African Airlines Association. They decided to adopt what they call an Air Afrique concept that would create equitable partnerships between airlines or across a group of investments. All right, then, so let's explore this story from a South African perspective. CGTN's Sumitra Naidu joins us now live from Johannesburg with more data on this. Sumitra, what's the benefit here for this sort of arrangement for South African Airways?
Well, Ramah, for airlines that have similar MOUs in place, it's really about taking advantage of their networks and getting more bums and seats. SAA has just started flying again.
Unfortunately, we are having a bit of a technical problem with that link to Johannesburg. We'll try and get Sumitra back online as soon as we can. Now, the head of the World Trade Organization is calling on WTO members to help address vaccine inequity. WTO Director General Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala's remarks came at the opening session of a Geneva-based trade event alongside the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa. Speaking at the same event, Ramaphosa has also pressed for a waiver on intellectual property to enable countries to produce COVID-19 vaccines and drugs on a much larger scale and at lower prices. The World Health Organization started talks on a waiver to intellectual property rules for COVID-19 products roughly a year ago, but several countries with strong pharmaceutical industries, including the host, Switzerland, have remained opposed to that idea.
The rebound in growth and trade is unequal across countries and regions, as is access to COVID-19 vaccines. 100 million people have been pushed into extreme poverty, mostly in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. While nearly 60% of people in developed countries are fully vaccinated, in Africa the figure is barely 4%. This is devastating for the lives and livelihoods of Africans. It is morally unacceptable, and as new variants spread, a threat to the health and economic recovery everywhere.
Passing a time-bound, targeted TRIPS waiver, as proposed by South Africa and India, and now supported by many countries around the world, is urgent if we are to save millions of lives. This is a proportionate response to the exceptional circumstances presented by COVID-19 pandemic. This is not the time just to be unidimensionally focused on just profit. This is the time to save lives. The aspirations of the Marrakesh Agreement should be at the center of our actions towards a post-COVID-19 economic recovery. We need to recognize that trade is not an end in itself, but it is a means of raising standards of living.
And back to our lead story, as you mentioned a little earlier, South African Airways and Kenya Airways coming together, agreeing to a memorandum of understanding that may, at least in the long run, lead to the formation of a Pan-African airline group. Glad to see our technical issues have been sorted out. Sumitra Naidu joins us once again from Johannesburg. So, Sumitra, as we were saying a little earlier, what's the upside here for SAA?
I think, Rama, the real benefit is really about routes and networks and getting bums and seats. And, you know, for any airline that has an MOU like this, that's exactly what it's about. But SAA is really, you know, it's been struggling financially for many, many years. It now has new leadership. It has a new strategy in place. The airline is really trying to get its strength back, especially on the continent. Now, SAA does see Kenya Airways as a strong regional player. The MOU will mean more collaboration between the airlines, passenger networks, as well as trade, so cargo as well. There will be collaboration on skills, expertise, innovation, also streamlining the customer experience on either side. So there are lots of benefits here, I think, for both airlines. SAA, of course, in a far worse state than Kenya Airways. It needs whatever it can get. So any MOU at this stage would be beneficial to it.
All right, so let's get a sense of where SAA is at the moment, because the airline restarted domestic flights 5 days ago. Regional flights are now underway. But what's the plan to ramp up to full operations? How big a fleet can SAA run?
Well, right now, SAA is concentrating on the Cape Town-Johannesburg route. It's the third busiest domestic route in the world. In 2019, there was over 33,700 flights recorded. It does make sense it would do that route first. So that's locally. Regionally, there will be flights from Joburg to Accra, Kinshasa, Harare, Lusaka, and Maputo. Now, SAA is, of course, down to just a few aircraft. The new CEO, Gideon Novick, did say it's a smaller, leaner operation as they come back. But there is a growth strategy in place that will see more planes and routes being added, depending on demand and, of course, market conditions. Last year, as part of SAA's business rescue process, 21 aircraft that were under lease were returned. So there was about 19 planes left, only 9 owned by SAA, most of which were the bigger planes for long-haul flights, but very heavy on fuel. But last month, 2 more planes, A320s, also under lease, were serviced and returned to South Africa. So it's got a small but fair enough fleet as it starts to fly again.
Okay,
Rama?
right. So one last question for you. SAA Technical, that's the fleet maintenance repair arm of SAA. Where does this fit into the MOU that's been agreed to with Kenya Airways?
Well, SAA Technical is very much a part of this agreement as both airlines look for mutual benefits here. SAA Technical is a division of SAA. It's very highly regarded, boasting top-class engineering. And this MOU does entail shared services in the areas of fleet capacity, deployment, technical, as well as maintenance and repairs. Both airlines have been hard hit by the pandemic. Both are looking at ways of leveraging their expertise and growing their respective businesses. It will be interesting, though, to see how this cooperation will unfold physically. The airlines are still ironing out the finer details. The agreement, though, does allow either airline to pursue other commercial agreements with other airlines, so they're not tied into this. So again, you know, it's wherever they can get any agreement, any partnership to grow their strategy and to get business strong enough again, I suppose they will take it. Rama?
Indeed. We'll leave it there for the time being. Sumitra Naidu in Johannesburg. Let's head over to Nigeria now. The country attracted over $4 billion in foreign remittances in the first quarter of 2021 as the country continues to grapple with foreign currency challenges. Now, Nigeria relies heavily on diaspora remittances to shore up its balance of payment obligations. Back in 2020, it reported about $16.9 billion in remittance inflows compared to $23.4 billion in 2019. With the details, here's CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam.
Nigeria has a massive diaspora population. Data from the UN's Department of Economic and Social Affairs show that there are about 1.7 million Nigerians in the diaspora. Most of them remit much-needed funds back home for friends and family. But recent statistics from the central bank shows that inflows have dipped.
Diaspora remittance often go to the informal sector, families who receive them. And so what that means is, if they've declared, it also means that one of the poverty mitigation framework also declines in terms of families depend, some of them depend on remittance from their relatives abroad.
Africa's largest economy attracted $4.2 billion in foreign remittances in the first quarter of 2021. That's a 24% decline year on year compared to $5.6 billion reported same period last year.
What do we have now is that people are sending money into the country through unknown other channels, which has also made it difficult for data to be captured, and in terms of the accuracy and the actual number of remittances coming into the country, either through the black market or peer-to-peer means of sending money. Some people say like a cryptocurrency.
The country's central bank has initiated several policies to boost foreign currency liquidity. The latest is the Naira for Dollar scheme, where it gives a 5 Naira incentive for every dollar remitted through formal channels. But several factors such as corruption, insecurity, and the pandemic-induced disruptions have upended inflows.
Ironically, come down on money laundering and how it impacts on even those who are involved in innocent business can be a disincentive to those kind of transfers. Nigerian global economic rating has dropped significantly, and insecurity, and of course not just insecurity, basically the economy is bad, conflicts around the country, infrastructure is collapsing, and so the sense of contagion and the sense of fright. So you expect that investors are not going to come in.
Economic watchers are also blaming the government's policies for the fall.
The National Assembly is also not encouraging. For instance, there has been debate that we should give the diaspora the right to vote. And you know what that is going to mean? That will, in a way, will have attracted people in the diaspora, give them a sense of belonging. But today, the electoral bill has been passed awaiting harmonization. They've not given the diaspora, an opportunity to vote in future elections.
Besides crude oil, diaspora remittances is one of Nigeria's main sources of foreign exchange earnings. The nation is currently facing one of its worst forex crises as the naira continues to depreciate. Experts advise government to focus on ramping up its monetary and fiscal policies to promote diversification, improve local production, and fair distribution of resources. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
All right, then a quick run through some company news. Let's start in the world of retail. ShopRite has posted a $10.3 million gain from the sale of its assets in Uganda, Madagascar and Nigeria. With a 53-week period ending on the 4th of July, the group made a provision of about $87 million on loss-making stores outside South Africa. Its net debt also went up by 4% to $1.77 billion. ShopRite Group operates more than 2,900 outlets in some 15 countries across Africa and the Indian Ocean Islands. The digital-only non-deposit-taking lender, Tala, has announced that it set aside some $10,000 grants to support Kenyan medium and small-sized enterprises that have been adversely affected by the pandemic. The program will be rolled out in October. It's part of the COVID-19 Rebuild Fund initiative launched last year. So the lender offers zero-interest loans to over 180 businesses offering essential services. The toy maker Lego's profits more than doubled in the first 6 months of the year. That as brick fans stayed home, apparently to build Star Wars and Harry Potter models and a lot more besides, even after pandemic restrictions started to ease. Lego saw consumer sales up 36%, revenue is up 46% to $3.62 billion. Net earnings went up 140% to over $990 million in the first 6 months of the year. And finally, Ford has announced plans to invest $11 billion to build several new plants in the United States just to produce parts for electric vehicles. Ford has described that investment as the single largest one in its 118-year history. The automaker says it would enable it to produce more than 1 million electric vehicles a year in the second half of this decade, creating nearly 11,000 jobs in the process. That's a run through your company headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up. East African banks are urged to adopt new strategies to cope with growing client demands. And we'll explore how African countries continue to pay a relatively high price for climate change.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference. Welcome back to the program. A just released report from Deloitte states that banks in East Africa do need to rethink their financial and operational strategies. In order to thrive, Deloitte's arguing, banks need to fully embrace digital transformation. They need to enhance the operational resilience and adapt to where their consumers are doing their banking. With customers increasingly seeking a seamless banking experience and a lot more tailored products, digital transformation is absolutely critical for these banks to be able to meet these demands. But at the same time, there are risks. There are ever more complex cyber attacks targeting potentially unforeseen vulnerabilities, and banks therefore must ensure that cybersecurity is embedded into their organizational culture. This pandemic has brought to the fore the need for banks to continue revamping their business continuity plans, their talent management plans, and their operational processes as well. So let's dig a little deeper into that particular report. Charles Lowe is the team lead for financial institutional services at Deloitte East Africa, is part of the team that wrote that report. He joins us now live on the program. Charles, good to see you tonight. So one of the things that stood out for me is you argued in the report that the industry got quite a blow when the government encouraged a shift from conventional cash transactions over to electronic money. Why was this an issue?
Thank you for that question. In the first instance, I want to mention that the banks in East Africa, especially in Kenya, are really proactive in adopting digital practices. And therefore, this really, on an overall basis, presented bigger opportunities in the medium and long term. However, the reason why we identify that as an issue is, in the first instance, more transactions are then moved to mobile payment platforms and mobile wallets as opposed to within the banking industry. And then the second factor, which was also important, when that happened, the central bank had mandated that all the transfers between mobile money wallets, for example, with the M-Pesa, they will not incur any additional charges. So really that drove the additional sort of issues that we noted because of the potential reduction in revenues in the banking sector, especially to do with transaction fees.
But wasn't that concentration risk something that could have been foreseen? I mean, for a very long period before, because year after year, we keep seeing M-Pesa transaction volumes rising steadily. We see more and more banks rolling out apps, individuals doing a lot more banking, essentially all on their mobile phones. I mean, that concentration risk was foreseeable.
Indeed. And and to our point, so it's really just accelerated what we already had known, that with the advent of such a pandemic, it really pushed more of the transactions onto the mobile payment platforms, and that therefore there's a need for banks to really now start rethinking where they stand in this critical ecosystem of financial inclusion.
On one extreme end, would that essentially mean banks perhaps forming their own, for argument's sake, their own telco company that would essentially allow them to handle all these transactions?
I mean, I think they not necessarily need to do that. I think that we are seeing a number of partnerships, and some of them are coming up with what we call platform businesses, where they can actually attract various individuals who can assist them in that front. So really beyond, because setting up your own telco can be very costly, but we are seeing setting up fintechs, and really the aspect of partnerships will be even more important going forward if the banks have to remain competitive.
Okay, so where does the question of regulatory risk come in, though? Because even though we're seeing the shift to mobile-first banking in many instances across the entire board, at the same time, as you mentioned, the central bank during the pandemic stepped in and said, we're going to impose price caps on certain kinds of transactions. How do you assess that risk of capped income moving forward?
Well, I think that's a very interesting one. So the regulator has been very clear in terms of where they want to go. So they want the banking industry to be really driving their own pricing, and the pricing will be driven by two aspects: the credit quality of the customer, and also the historical sort of performance of that particular customer. So it's a combination of that. So provided that there is transparent pricing where good customers, for example, got good credit reference bureau ratings, will be able to get good credits, and those who are not, they will then perhaps get higher charges. So really, if that is implemented in a very transparent and effective manner, we anticipate that then the capping might not actually come to the fore, but it will really now broaden up the opportunities of more people getting access to funding, provided it's implemented correctly by the banking industry.
All right, let's talk about NPLs, because among Kenyan banks, this has been rising consistently for the last 7 years or so. I believe we've gone up from around 6%, and we hit 14% back in the month of June. That rise has been steady, but the percentage of NPLs has also been very, very sticky. Why?
Yes, I think you would appreciate that last year we, as a country, as a nation, we struggled with the pandemic. We really focus on, we've got a big part of our economy that focuses on tourism, and a number of market players in that sector couldn't actually sort of service their facilities on the back of sort of dried up revenues. So on the back of that, we did see that impact trickling through in terms of the increase in NPLs. So the economy itself had fundamentally impacted the ability of a number of customers to pay. So that is one fundamental aspect, but also talking to the point that we were discussing earlier, we've seen significant rise in what you call unsecured lending in the market, and that goes to the mobile payment or mobile lending sort of activities that a number of banks are engaged in. So those tend to be more risky, and we tend to see when there's a pandemic or there's economic downturn, you see that trickles through into the NPL ratios. So well, really that's
just 1 minute there, Charles, because from what NCBA's CEO, John Gashora, was telling us, he says the NPLs that he's looking at for their mobile lending products are relatively low in the single digits. In fact, he says his bank portfolio has a much higher NPL ratio compared to the mobile side of it. So, I mean, surely it can't all be down to the mobile side of lending.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a combination. So we do have a significant and secure lending portfolio. So if you reflect on what we observed in the market, so the unsecured lending did go up, and it has been going up over the years, and that tends to have issues, especially because it's retail. And we did see a number of retail players really struggle in the market when it comes to servicing their loans. So what saved the day is that there was also some dispensation from the central bank to say, do not list some of these customers as non-performing loans in accordance with the classification rules. So that saved the day. But now with that, so that really also, to some extent, from an analysis that we've done, the unsecured lending, in a combination of including some of the digital facilities, they did contribute to the increase in non-performing loans over time, as it went.
Indeed, that certainly does bear some further examination. But one last question for you. So one of the other things that stood out here was that you pointed out that there's literally a handful of banks in the region that have recognized the potential threat from organized cyber criminal groups rather than just random hackers roaming about in cyberspace. And even fewer, you say, are ready to address it. So is this just a question of cost, or is it just that at board and at C-suite level, these individuals just don't see this as a potential threat that needs to be addressed immediately?
So certainly we are seeing a lot of. So if you look at the context in which we wrote that, we are seeing there's a lot of recognition of the organized crime syndicates on the back of the impact that they can potentially do to the banking sector, and a number of C-suites are really rising up to the occasion and seeing this can be a potential risk more than anything else, and that is even now being accelerated with on the back of what we are seeing. All of them actually opting to open up the digital platforms. So really, whilst there's been that sort of a bit of inertia, we are now seeing this is becoming priority of almost all the CEOs, and we're hoping that we could see more traction really going forward in that respect.
All right, we'll leave it there for the time being. Charles Lowe, Team Lead for Financial Institution Services at Deloitte East Africa. Thank you very much. Now then, let's talk about climate change, shall we? Youth climate activists Vanessa Nakate and Greta Thunberg have criticized global leaders for failing to meet funding pledges as climate change continues to wreak havoc worldwide. 400 climate activists from 180 countries are in Italy's financial capital for a 3-day Youth for Climate Summit. And will send its recommendations to a major UN summit in Glasgow in Scotland, which starts at the end of October. Nakate is a 24-year-old activist from Uganda. She said pledges of $117 billion a year to help countries which are particularly vulnerable to the impact of climate change have not materialized.
It's time for our leaders to wake up. It's time for our leaders to stop talking and start acting. It's time to count the real costs, and it's time for the polluters to pay. It's time to keep the promises. No more empty promises, no more empty summits, no more empty conferences. It's time to show us the money. It's time, it's time, it's time. And don't forget to listen to the most affected people and areas. Thank you.
Now, the effects of climate change, of course, are being felt by farmers in Egypt, with the production of olives and mangoes taking a huge hit. Egypt was the largest producer of table olives in the world last year, but it's seen an 80% drop in the harvest. Here's CGTN's Yasser Kim with that story.
Egyptian olive producer Ehab Khalil looks shattered. This is the worst harvest from his farm since he started growing olives 15 years ago.
The whole crop is gone. It's dead, all of it. If I say I've come out with 10% of the crop, then this would be a success. In other farms, producers have recorded 100% crop loss.
There's panic, which is easily visible in his face amid the carnage in his farm.
That's one tree in the middle of 980 empty trees. The whole land doesn't have any olives. Hey, look, we found an olive. One olive. Thank God, but it's just one olive. These trees used to carry tons of olives.
Like most producers, Khalil blames climate change for this tragedy. Egypt's olive harvest has plummeted by 80% nationwide. The government is aware of the crisis and is trying to take remedial action.
Olives need complicated climate conditions. They need cool weather, are very sensitive to the spring changes, and are sensitive to high temperature changes. Unfortunately, all these changes happened this year. We set up and developed an early warning system whereby the farmer would have access to information to warn him before any sudden climate change hit the farm. He would then be advised to either stop irrigation or stop fertilizing, or add certain components that would help the crop overcome the difficult conditions.
The effects of this harvest loss are far-reaching, as the North African country was the largest producer of table olives globally in 2020.
We met with the World Bank last week about this issue. FAO, IFAD, and other organizations that offer services to nations like us to help map up strategies on how to deal with these phenomena. That's in addition to financial, technical, and scientific support.
That's the long-term strategy to deal with climate change. But what will be expected during the short term?
In the next few years, we will see even more stronger effects of climate change and perhaps even worse. The problem is not just the faster pace of change, but also new weather changes that are unexpected. All these will have a negative impact on agriculture.
We would then be forced to sell our clothes, not just the land. We have made huge losses this year. If it repeats, we'll lose our homes.
It's a gloomy outcome that Khalil is dreading to face if there's no quick fix soon. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
As Libyan politicians still work on reaching a consensus on its elections laws ahead of the December 24th vote, the interim government is moving ahead with the country's reconstruction plans. Officials from the Government of National Unity are touring the world as they look to convince investors to resume projects which are frozen due to the civil conflict and to embark on new reconstruction projects. CGTN's Adel El-Marouki spoke with Libya's Minister of State for Economic Affairs, Salama Al-Gouail, on the economic challenges that the North African oil producer is facing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister, for being with us in CGTN. You took office after 10 years of destruction and civil war. There must be huge challenges. What are the main challenges that your government is facing in terms of economic development?
The challenges Libya is facing are the same economic challenges a country faces when it has been through political division and a decade-long war. All infrastructure is either volatile or broken. There are challenges against political and security stability. The situation is difficult. Hopefully, the Government of National Unity's efforts to bring Libya together will reverse that situation. The first success for the government is that it managed to create a type of international competitiveness between countries to enable reconstruction efforts.
Economic ties between Libya and China have been growing, yet during, of course, the past 10 years, we've seen a freeze in the investments and the Chinese projects going on ground. How are you reviving that?
Ties with China were very promising before 2011. It's a strong partner, and we had many projects in the process. We know the reputation of the Chinese companies, and we know the successes they made. Most of the construction and real estate projects were in partnerships with China. Unfortunately, the war made Chinese investors withdraw. Security remains a challenge. We know that China takes the safety of its people seriously. We are inviting our friends in China to come and invest in Libya, and of course our government will be committed to providing whatever it takes to resume these projects.
There is appetite from the world to participate in Libya's reconstruction, but do you think that they will be encouraged more after the elections are completed?
Of course, if the elections are held, these will show that we are moving steadily towards a peaceful transition of power. That will give the impression that we are a country and people who have the capability to end division and accept democracy. Therefore, the elections are fundamental steps that a civil, strong state can be built upon.
How much Libya needs to spend to reconstruct what has been destroyed in the past 10 years?
I have met many experts to come up with a figure. According to the studies we have made, Libya will need about $111 billion based on the current exchange rate, which is 4.48 dinars for a dollar. That will be divided into roughly $11 billion annually so that we can facilitate proper cash flow. That will help the government to recover financially. That should be enough for all fields of development. We have great hopes for decent growth rates. We don't know if that is achievable. What we wish for first is to maintain stability, and from there, maybe we can reach up to 7% growth rates.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
The second China-Africa Economic and Trade Expo concluded on Tuesday in Changsha in Hunan province. Officials and insiders say the province has put in place a series of measures to provide new opportunities for trade between the two regions in a post-pandemic era. Shuju reports.
To provide better and convenient financial services for Chinese and African businesses, the provincial government of Hunan set up a China-Africa cross-border RMB service center in the Hunan branch of the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China earlier this year. The center has teamed up with the African banks in countries such as Egypt, Nigeria, and Kenya for providing renminbi-related services. It also provides foreign exchange settlement and purchase services in 5 African countries.
Earlier, we always felt that economic and trade cooperation with Africa needs to be improved further. For example, our investment in Africa is booming in technical cooperation and engineering contracting sectors. But very few African products are actually being imported into China. The cross-border RMB service center will help improve this situation and make it easier for African products to be exported to China.
Hunan is also building a pilot zone for in-depth economic and trade cooperation between China and Africa. It is more like an incubator program for enterprises from both sides and provides services in 8 areas such as brand building and e-commerce operations. The province has vowed to create new growth drivers for China-Africa cooperation and showcase its experiences as an example for bilateral cooperation at the local level.
We focus on one core region and 5 areas in Changsha, Chenzhou, Yueyang, Liuyang, and also the Yuhua district. They will have their characteristic focuses. We will first introduce non-resource-based products from Africa to Changsha, deep process them here and then promote them to the market. In this way, we can let trade drive our industry and manufacturing. Also, as a pilot zone, the systems there must be creative. We will figure out ways to simplify the application process for documents such as the health certificate for foreigners, detention certificate, and qualification certificate, so that it will be easier for experts and talents from abroad to live and work here.
Hunan province has also implemented measures such as building a center for distributing and processing non-resource-based products from Africa and expanding cooperation between the pilot free trade zones in the province and African countries. Zhuzhu, CGTN, Changsha.
We'll leave it there for the time being. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up next. Petrol prices in the UK hit an 8-year high as the country's fuel crisis grinds on. And the famous Afghan rug business suffers a setback as the Taliban take charge.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to the program. Let's run through some of the stories making your headlines at this hour. Mali has asked a private Russian military company, the Wagner Group, to help it fight insurgents. The country's year-old military junta says it's close to a deal. According to Mali's interim Prime Minister, Choguel Maiga, the country is seeking to fill in the gap left by France withdrawing troops from Operation Barkhane. Now into the Democratic Republic of Congo, more than 80 aid workers, including some employed by the World Health Organization, are said to have been involved in incidents of sexual abuse and exploitation during the Ebola crisis. According to an independent commission, investigators uncovered a total of 9 rape allegations that were allegedly committed by both national and international members of staff. And Kenya Airways has partnered with South African Airways to improve services and keep the two carriers afloat. The loss-making carriers signed a memorandum of cooperation on the 28th of September as they look to form a pan-African airline group in the long run. The agreement, however, does not preclude either party from pursuing independent commercial cooperation with other carriers within their route network strategy. That's a run through your headlines. Let's move to other stories outside the continent. Fuel in the UK continues to be in short supply. The Association of British Gasoline Retailers has warned that up to 90% of petrol pumps were running dry in some areas of the country due to supply chain problems, and that in turn was caused by a shortage of truck drivers. The PRA represents independent fuel retailers who account for about 65% of all UK forecourts. Andrew Wilson found this report.
Even before the sun was up on a new week, determined drivers across the UK joined long lines of cars waiting for fuel. They'd heard that nearly two-thirds of the country's 8,000 petrol stations were dry and didn't want to get caught out. A fear that's caused some chaos and long lines across the country and occasions where tempers have been getting frayed. The government doesn't want to accuse people of panic buying, but ministers are clear nonetheless that the drivers should avoid stocking up unnecessarily.
The quicker people do that, the better. There is no shortage of petrol, plenty of petrol in both our refineries and in storage. The only reason we don't have petrol in forecourts is that people are buying petrol and they don't need it.
Despite that, by midday, particularly in the cities, the situation was only getting worse.
I'm not that worried, because obviously it will be resolved sooner or later. It has to be resolved. It can't go on like that.
Yesterday I was queuing. I was like about to arrive to fill up the car, then petrol is finished. Today I still have like quarter of the tank. Hopefully maybe another half an hour to get there. It's really frustrating.
The government does have options. Ministers have said they're relaxing the competition laws, allowing fuel suppliers to work together logistically with competitors filling each other's forecourts if necessary. The government will also introduce a temporary relaxation of visas to allow back the European drivers pushed out by Brexit earlier this year. However, there's no guarantee such drivers will want to return for the 3-month period being proposed. Soldiers could be deployed to replace the driver shortage, but they'll need special training in handling liquid fuel loads. And all these options will take time, and public patience is already wearing thin. The government's biggest hope is that the panic buying slows down, and of that there is very little sign so far. Andrew Wilson, CGTN.
Let's get to the latest developments on this story. Elena Casas joins us now live from London. Elena, what's the latest on the availability of fuel supplies in retail stations across the country?
Well, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson said this evening retailers have signalled more fuel has reached petrol stations in the course of the day, and the Petrol Retailers Association does say the situation is slowly improving. But as we heard there, politicians have spent most of the day begging the public not to fill water bottles with petrol as queues of cars continue to stretch down roads and pumps across the country continue to run dry. The government has put a number of military tanker drivers on standby to deliver petrol. They haven't been used yet, and as I say, the Prime Minister now says the situation's improving, but he also didn't exactly rule out the possibility of it getting worse in the future.
So short-term visas for HGV drivers, these are among the potential solutions that were floated on the table. But drivers from the EU do not want to come to work in the UK. What's making the market so unattractive?
Well, as we heard there, the government's plan announced at the weekend is to issue 5,000 short-term visas for European workers that would only be valid for 3 months, just until Christmas. Industry insiders say that's not nearly enough. The British Retail Consortium said 4 times as many visas would be needed, and they should run for at least 2 years to encourage people to come. The government has rejected that idea. It says that businesses should stop being dependent on low-wage immigration to fill jobs. But recruitment agencies say they're going to struggle to get anyone to relocate for just 3 months. So while we don't know yet how keen European lorry drivers are to take up those visas, it's certainly true that they're in demand at the moment everywhere else in Europe. And of course, if they work on the continent, they can stay as long as they like without doing any visa paperwork. Drivers also say the facilities are better and that Britain has failed to invest in infrastructure like free showers, parking and decent restaurants by motorways. So overall, it doesn't seem like the most tempting offer.
Indeed. Over the weekend, the Transport Minister also argued that the shortage, in his view, in grant shops, was entirely the fault of buyers who are making these bulk purchases, including, of course, with the water bottles that you just alluded to a little earlier. But nonetheless, the panic buying, the long queues, they're still there. So clearly the British public doesn't believe him. Why?
Well, I don't think it's that people don't believe him, but nobody thinks that they themselves are panic buying, do they? They just think that they need a tank of fuel to get somewhere, and if they've heard lots of places are running out, they will rush out and get a tank because they're worried that otherwise they won't get to work tomorrow. I think that's human nature. People will always say that panic buying is something that only other people do. Of course, it's also difficult to panic buy petrol because once your tank is full, it's full, and the majority of people don't go around filling jerry cans. So basically, the industry is hoping that this will die off once most people have a full tank. The opposition Labour Party says the government shouldn't be blaming ordinary people at all, but should instead have prepared for an inevitable shortage of lorry drivers after Brexit.
Indeed, and that's a subject we're going to come back to over and over again. One last question for you, though. Spot gas prices over well over 160 pence per unit, but more than 4 times what they were before the pandemic. This is often described as a supply crisis, but is there any extra supply that can come online, at least in the short term?
So the wholesale price of natural gas is another separate energy crisis that's also worrying people in Britain. The price actually went up this morning to 218 pence per therm, which is the measuring unit for natural gas. Now, it's a problem across Europe, and while it is particularly bad here in the UK, it's not so clearly connected to Brexit as the lorry driver issue. It's more because Britain has very low storage capacity for natural gas, and it has seen a number of outages in the electricity system in recent weeks, including a fire at a key cable that imports electricity from France and a lack of wind in the North Sea to produce renewable energy. So all of that means more electricity needs to be generated from gas, and it's come at the same time as a big drop in supplies coming from Russia, which is the main supplier of natural gas to Europe. So there is a hope that Russia could pump more, and there's been a lot of talk about sharing the energy supply more between European countries. But the problem at the moment is that there's a shortage of gas everywhere in Europe, so it's likely to be unavoidable that household energy bills are going to go up.
Indeed, it really is a perfect storm, isn't it? Elena Casas there live in London. Now, still on that question of gas supplies, the Russian energy giant Gazprom and Hungary have signed a 15-year gas supply contract, triggering fury from Ukraine. Now, the deal is for 4.5 billion cubic meters of natural gas a year. That should account for roughly half of Hungary's gas consumption. It will also guarantee supplies through entirely new routes, running through Serbia and Austria, effectively cutting off the Ukraine as a transit country.
The deal that will see Hungary tied to a long-term contract with Gazprom was signed here at Budapest's Foreign Ministry. The Russian gas giant will provide gas for the next 15 years with the option for Hungary to change the amount it purchases after the first 10. It comes after a 25-year deal Hungary signed in 1996 with Russian gas shipped via Ukrainian pipelines, recently coming to an end. The new deal will see 4.5 billion cubic metres of natural gas supplied annually, a 7% increase on Hungary's gas use last year. The majority of Hungary's shipments will now come via Serbia, and 1 billion cubic metres will also enter Hungary from Austria.
Here in Hungary, energy supply is a matter of security, sovereignty and economics, but not politics. Flats, homes and apartments cannot be heated with political manifestos, only with gas. The same is true with industry.
According to local media reports, Gazprom is ready to increase supplies to Europe and is interested in more supply contracts. In the past, the Russian gas giant has been accused by the International Energy Agency and members of the European Parliament of not doing enough to increase its gas supplies to Europe, where prices have soared. Russia has been selling gas to Hungary for nearly 5 decades, and that's set to continue with this new deal starting on the 1st of October. Penelope Leash, CGTN, Budapest.
Well, Away from issues in Europe, the rug industry is one of the oldest and most profitable local industries in Afghanistan. With a change in power, however, the rug industry and many other parts of the economy have been drastically affected. Abdul Haidariz has more.
The rug weaving industry is one of the few local industries in Afghanistan. Afghan rugs are very famous for their quality, design and craftsmanship. They are traditionally made in the north. Most of the rugs have throughout the years been exported. Local customers have always been a minor market. With the change of government, disruption in banking services and closure of borders, especially the closing of air corridors, the industry is facing difficult times.
Currently, business is not as good as before. Only a few people come to buy rugs. Those who do are going abroad. Foreigners don't come. A small quantity is exported through Pakistan. Before, we used to export rugs through a courier service. Now we export through Pakistan.
Since the takeover, most rug makers have lost their jobs, and the few remaining laborers have seen a shortfall in earnings.
We were 4 to 5 people working here before. Now there's only 2 of us. Since the Taliban took over, business has not been good. The rug business has almost collapsed. I used to earn 1,000 to 1,500 Afghanis a day, but now I earn almost nothing. I have 5 children and a wife. I'm away from home to earn money and send it back.
Most of the rugs are exported through air corridors. Kabul airport has been made ready for domestic and international flights, but outgoing air freight service is yet to be restored. Resumption is the key to keep the rug industry afloat.
The most important issue is Kabul airport. If it starts operations, people will come from abroad. It will be very good for us. The factories will restart their operations. Because 70% of our business is export, if that is reopened, the problems will soon be solved.
The banking limitations on international transactions have also had an impact on the rug business, suspending the import of raw materials. But traders are still hopeful that the business will get up to speed once the overall economy becomes stable.
Exporters have to make transactions to several accounts separately. They cannot transfer to one person. Raw material imports are completely closed. If import-export begins and banks start operations, we will transfer the money and we will receive raw materials.
Although the security situation has improved since the Taliban takeover, local businesses continue to suffer due to the economic uncertainty. If there is no relief soon, a collapse of traditional businesses such as this may affect the lowest links of their fragile supply chains. Abdul Haidariz, CGTN, Kabul, Afghanistan.
Let's make a quick run through commodity prices, shall we? So, as I mentioned a little earlier, oil prices are a huge problem worldwide. Brent and WTI, they've pulled back ever so slightly from intraday highs of $80.75 on Brent, $76.67 a barrel on WTI. But the rapid ascent of crude is rattling policymakers and consumers alike worldwide. We'll cover that, in fact, on the currency side of the program a little later. In contrast, gold has had a torrid run in September, down about 4.25% to go back to levels that we last saw some 6 weeks ago. A stronger dollar certainly not helping, but neither is talk from central banks about cutting back their bond purchase programs. Here's what's coming up next. Kenya's banking on a resumption of travel to recoup massive losses in tourism after the pandemic.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climate and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent, to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. The tourism industry was one of those hit the worst by the coronavirus pandemic. In Kenya, the sector recorded a loss of at least $1 billion last year, but the country is hopeful that things will turn around as travel resumes.
Kenya's tourism sector lost close to $1 billion in revenue between January and October in 2020, while the numbers of foreign visitors fell by 2/3. Marian Minayo, for instance, says she used to book about 10 clients per day, but the number has drastically gone down. She's a visually impaired masseuse.
Last year we didn't have business, so we didn't have massages. I only did maybe 1 or 2 a day, but now it has picked up. I can do up to 6 massages per day.
The industry is estimated to employ over 2 million people.
The revenue that we were actually drawing from international clients always declined almost by 80%. This forced us to put our staff members on a rotational schedule, whereby some of them were not fully on duty. And because some of them were not fully on duty, this actually affected them.
From safaris in the Masai Mara and other world-beating wildlife reserves to holidays in pristine Indian Ocean beaches, Kenya's tourism industry contributes 10% of economic output. The East African nation welcomed 10 million visitors in 2019, but according to the tourism ministry, it only got 300,000 visitors in the first half of this year.
I wish after this corona gets to be coming a lot, the way they were coming before corona. We were very busy and we were happy.
Marian's manager thinks the country's strategy of marketing the country's holiday spots to its own citizens must continue in order to buffer the sector from similar disruption in the future.
We can be able to promote both international and domestic tourism so that we can also diversify from over-reliance of international market by bringing in all the people in the country so that they can visit the lodge, and with that we can be able to draw a lot of revenue.
Kenya's tourism minister Najib Balala says equal access to COVID-19 vaccines is key to rebuilding Africa's devastated tourism industries. About 21 million jobs have been lost in the sector across the continent since the start of the pandemic. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
Quick run through the currencies here for you. So Kenya has held its Monetary Policy Committee meeting today. No material change in the policy rate from the MPC, but it pointed out that domestic and international inflationary pressure is growing. The MPC says it stands ready to respond to any second round effects, and it stands ready as well to take any additional measures necessary. The next MPC meeting is due in November, but the MPC, quote, remains ready to reconvene earlier if necessary. We'll certainly get a bit more elaboration on the committee's views on inflation tomorrow morning. That's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen here in the last hour. Many ways to get your feedback back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.